Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for May 16th, 2023. As you'll see from my report today, it's clear that the war hawks in the West are on a rampage. They're escalating the war in Ukraine against Russia in a very dangerous way, which could risk a nuclear confrontation. Now, the Zelensky tour of Europe, which has just been completed, makes two things clear. First, that Zelensky has no love for the people of Ukraine. He's willing to sacrifice all of them in order to be a good little puppet for his US, UK, NATO puppet masters in his drive to get more aid, more money, more weapons. Secondly, the leaders of Europe likewise have no concerns for the security of their people as they increase the funding for the war despite the economic suffering that this funding and support for the war has caused in their nations. Further, by providing more powerful offensive weapons and destructive weapons, they've become a full party of the war and are, in a sense, painting a bullseye on their nations. Now, Zelensky was adamant in his meetings with leaders in Berlin, in Paris, in Rome, and in London. He insisted there be no negotiations and no peace until there's a total victory for Ukraine. In the process, he insulted the Pope and the Chinese at a time when some in Europe are reconsidering the push to join the US and the UK in a crusade against China. This idea that China has to be threatened in order to keep them from supporting Russia continues to be an ongoing theme in Washington and London. And Zelensky was part of that in his criticisms of the Chinese peace plan. Now, of course, at the forefront of those committed to the escalation is the United Kingdom. And Zelensky met yesterday with Sunak, who promised missiles and long-range drones. Prime Minister Sunak said, quote, "The UK will remain steadfast. It is important for the Kremlin to also know we are not going away. We are here for the long term," unquote. Echoing the talk of Blinken, Biden, and others of basically a permanent war to dismantle and defeat Russia. The BBC report on the meeting was very clear. They said the UK is going further than any other country in providing weapons with the potential to tip the battlefield in Ukraine's favor, unquote. And also in Berlin, Chancellor Scholz increased the aid from Germany to Ukraine, promising more tanks, more anti-aircraft to the tune of $3 billion. Remember what Baerbock, the foreign minister, said several months ago: we are at war with Russia, and it is a war to the end. Now, such suicidal behavior from Germany obviously ignores the history of the result of the last time Germany was engaged in a fight to the end with Russia. But a reminder of that history was provided in an article by American historian and analyst Cliff Kirikoff in China Focus titled "Advancing Multipolarity and Safeguarding the Legacy of the World War II Victory," unquote. And in the article, Kirikoff asks, is there any difference between the Nazi doctrine of Lebensraum, which means living space, and NATO's eastward march today, unquote? This is a very precise comment because Hitler justified the march to the east, Operation Barbarossa, as needed to gain more territory for the German population. But it was also a part of the drive to break up the Soviet Union and loot the raw materials, especially the oil in Russia. And so Kirikoff's reminder is especially cogent today when the Germans are going to be sending tanks and other artillery and equipment to Ukraine, which could be used to attack Russia. Now, at the same time, there are more moves toward peace. In spite of NATO's rejection of Chinese diplomacy, Chinese Special Envoy for Eurasian Affairs, Li Hui, will come to Ukraine to discuss a political settlement to the war. Besides going to Kiev, he'll be going to other European capitals. The Chinese have been engaging in diplomacy for the cause of peace and development in the recent period with the success of the rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia. The Chinese clearly intend to do what they can to put an end to the fighting. At the same time, Hungary's foreign minister is in Beijing, and he wrote on his way there regarding the war in Ukraine, quote, "Europe is held hostage by a war psychosis," unquote. He called for increasing the voice of the peace camp, echoing Brazil's President Lula, and he urges support for the Chinese peace plan. So it's clear that there is an intent on some leaders, especially in the global south, to break with this war policy and to put an end to the colonial policy which the war policy serves. Now, I've received emails and comments have been posted on these videos asserting that it's impossible to change U.S. policy, that the U.S. is a war country driven by war, the military-industrial complex, that the U.S. has a history of a long history of intervention, coups and wars, and the only solution is to let the U.S. economy collapse. Well, I find that too cynical, and it ignores the alternative approach of the United States as an anti-colonial force in the world, which it has been at various times throughout its history, including with the founding of the nation. So it's true that the U.S. at present is dominated by a bipartisan coalition of war hawks funded by the military-industrial complex, which is corporate cartels that benefit from war, not just from the money spent in making war, but in the effect of war, establishing powers over and above sovereign nations to prevent those nations from resisting the looting policy that's ordered by the cartels. But there is this other tradition, and there's a potential now to discuss that, which was raised by the bold statements of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in asserting that he knows that the CIA was responsible for the murder of his uncle, President John F. Kennedy. So the door has been open for a dialogue on this question. Who killed Kennedy, President Kennedy, and why? And it's clear that he was seeking peace, that he was moving toward a détente policy with the Soviet Union after the near nuclear war that was triggered by the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now, for those who don't know this history, I'm putting a link in the description section to a speech, a very powerful speech delivered by President Kennedy on June 10th, 1963, nearly 60 years ago at American University, in which he appealed to the better instincts of the Americans and the Russian people to recognize the legitimate concerns of the other and to establish a basis for lasting peace. Take the time to listen to this speech. Listen to the words of President Kennedy, keeping in mind two things. One, that this speech probably was key in driving the war hawks to the decision that he had to be killed. And by war hawks, I mean specifically people from the CIA and the Joint Chiefs of Staff who were trying to get him into a war with Russia. But secondly, think about it in the context of the push for peace today, the kind of courage it takes to stand up against the war hawks. And that's the courage that must be there in every one of us, because we don't have a John F. Kennedy in the White House today, nothing close to it. but we have an opportunity to have this national discussion to change the policy. So listen to the speech, and I'll be back with you tomorrow. Hello, thanks for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our videos. Support our independence to produce videos like these. Become a member of the LaRouche organization at thelarouche.org/member. By becoming a member for $25 or more, you'll get special access to the EIR Alert Daily Briefing and weekly magazine, which is what I read to stay on top of things.